escape from the Western diet. The undertow of nutritionism is powerful. Much nutrition science qualifies as reductionist science, focusing as it does on individual nutrients, such as certain fats or carbohydrates or antioxidants, rather than on whole foods or dietary patterns. But using this sort of science to try to figure out what's wrong with the Western diet is probably unavoidable. However, imperfect, it's the sharpest experimental and explanatory tool we have. It also satisfies our hunger for a simple one-nutrient explanation. Yet it's one thing to entertain such explanations, and quite another to mistake them for the whole truth or to let any one of them dictate the way you eat. Many of the scientific theories put forward the account for exactly what in the Western diet is responsible for Western diseases conflict with one another. The lipid hypothesis cannot be reconciled with the carbohydrate hypothesis and the theory that a deficiency of omega-3 fatty acids, call it the neolipid hypothesis, is chiefly to blame for chronic illness, is at odds with the theory that refined carbohydrates are the key. And while everyone can agree that the flood of refined carbohydrates has pushed important micronutrients out of the modern diet, the scientists who blame our health problems on deficiencies of these micronutrients are not the same scientists who see a sugar-soaked diet leading to metabolic syndrome, and from there are diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. It is only natural for scientists, no less than the rest of us, to gravitate toward a single, all-encompassing explanation. This is probably why you now find some of the most fervent critics of the lipid hypothesis embracing the carbohydrates hypothesis with the same absolute zeal that they once condemned in the Fat Boys. In the course of my own research into these theories, I have been specifically warned by scientists allied with the carbohydrates camp not to fall under the spell of the omega-3 cult. There is a lot more religion and science than you might expect. So here we find ourselves lost at sea amid the cross currents of the conflicting science, or do we? Because it turns out we don't need to declare our allegiance to any one of these schools of thought in order to figure out how best to eat. In the end, they are only theories. Scientific explanations for an empirical phenomenon that is not itself in doubt. People are eating a Western diet, are prone to a complex of chronic diseases that solemn strike people eating more rational diets. Scientists can argue all they want about the biological mechanism behind the phenomenon, but whichever it is, the solution to the problem would appear to remain very much the same. Stop eating a Western diet. In truth, the chief value of any of those theories of nutrition, apart from satisfying our curiosity about how things work, is not the eater so much as it is the food industry and the medical community. The food industry needs the theories so it can better redesign specific processed foods. A new theory means a new line of products, allowing the industry to go on tweaking the Western diet instead of making any more radical change to the business model. For the industry, it's obviously preferable to have a scientific, rational for further processing foods, rather by lowering the fat or carbs or by boosting omega-3s or fortifying them with antioxidants and probiotics, than to entertain seriously the proposition that processed foods of any kind are a big part of the problem. For the medical community, too, scientific theories about diet nourish business as usual. New theories beget new drugs to treat diabetes, high blood pressure, and cholesterol, new treatments and procedures to ameliorate chronic diseases, and new diets organized around each other theories, evaluation of one class of nutrient and demotion of another. Much lip service is paid to the importance of prevention, but the healthcare industry stands to profit more handsomely from new drugs and procedures to treat chronic diseases than it does from a wholesale change in the way people eat. Cynical, perhaps? You should argue that the medical community's willingness to treat the broad contours of the Western diet as a given is a reflection of its realism rather than its greed. People don't want to go there. A Walter Willett response to the critic who asked him why the nurses' health study didn't study the benefits of more alternative diets, still medicalizing the whole problem of the Western diet instead of working to overturn it, rather at the level of patients or politics. It is exactly what you'd expect from a healthcare community that is sympathetic to nutrism as a matter of temperament, philosophy, and economics. You would not expect such a medical community to be sensitive to the culture or ecological dimensions of the food problem, and it isn't. We'll know this has changed when doctors kick the fast food franchises out of the hospitals. So what would a more ecological or cultural approach to the food problem counsel us? How might we plot our escape from nutrinism, and in turn from the most harmful effects of the Western diet? To Dennis Burkitt, the English doctor stationed in Africa during the World War II who gave the Western diseases their name, the answer seemed straightforward, if daunting. The only way we're going to reduce disease, he said, is to go backwards to the diet and lifestyle of our ancestors. This sounds uncomfortably like the approach of the diabetic aborigines who went back to the bush to heal themselves. But I don't think this is what Burkitt had in mind. Even if it was, it is not a very attractive or practical strategy for most of us. No, the challenge we face today is figuring out how to escape the worst elements of the Western diet and lifestyle without going back to the bush. In theory, nothing could be simpler. To escape the Western diet and the ideology of nutritionism, we have only to stop eating and thinking that way. But this is harder to do in practice given the treacherous food environment we now inhabit and the loss of cultural tools to guide us through it. Take the question of whole versus processed foods, presumably one of the simpler distinctions between modern industrial foods and older kinds. Georgi Krinis, who coined the term nutritionism, suggested that the most important fact about any food is not its nutrient content, but its degree of processing. He writes that whole foods and whole foods and industrial foods are the only two food groups I'd consider including in any useful food pyramid. In other words, instead of worrying about nutrients, we should simply avoid any food that has been processed to such an extent that it is more the product of an industry than the nature. This sounds like a sensible rule of thumb until you realize that industrial processes have by now invaded many whole foods too. Is a steak from a feedlot steer that consumed a diet of corn, various industrial waste products, antibiotics, and hormones still a whole food? I'm not sure. The steer has itself been raised on a Western diet, and that diet has rendered its meat sustainably different in the type and amount of fat in it, as well as its vitamin content from the beef our ancestors ate. The steer's industrial upbringing has also rendered its meat so cheap that we're likely to eat more of it more often than our ancestors ever would have. This suggests yet another sense in which the beef has become an industrial food. It is designed to be eaten industrially, too, as fast food. So plotting our way out of the Western diet is not going to be simple, yet I am very convinced that it can be done, and in the course of my research, I have been collected and developed some straightforward and distinctly unscientific rule of thumb or personal eating policies that might at least point us in the right direction. They don't say much about specific foods, about what sort of oil to cook with, or whether you should eat meat. They don't have much to say about nutrients or calories either, though eating according to these rules will perforce change the balance of nutrients and amount of calories in your diet. I'm not interested in dictating anyone's menu, but rather in developing what I think of as eating algorithm mental programs that, if you run them when you're shopping for food or deciding on a meal, will produce a great many different at dinners, all of them healthy in the broadest sense of the word. And our sense of the world stands in need of some broadening. When most of us think about food and health, we think in fairly narrow nutritionism terms about our personal physical health and how the ingestion of the particular nutrient or rejection of that affects is. But I no longer think it's possible to separate our bodily health from the health of the environment from which we eat, or the environment in which we eat, or for that matter, from the health of our general outlook about food and health. If my explorations of the food chain have taught me anything, it's that it is food chain and all the links in it are in fact linked. The health of the soil and the health of the plants and animals we eat, to the health of the food culture in which we eat them, to the health of the eater in body as well as mind. So you will find the rules here concerning not only what to eat but also how to eat it, as well as how the food is processed. Food consists not just in piles of chemicals, it also comprises a set of social and ecological relationships reaching back to the land and outward to other people. Some of these rules may strike you as having nothing whatever to do with health. In fact, they do. Many of the policies will also strike you as involving more work, and in fact they do. If there is one important sense in which we do need to heed Burkett's call to go backwards or follow the aborigines back into the bush, it is this one. In order to eat well, we need to invest more time, effort, and resources in providing for our sustenance, to dust off a word, than most of us do today. A hallmark of the Western diet is food that is fast, cheap, and easy. Americans spend less than 10% of their income on food. They also spend less than a half hour a day preparing meals and a little more than an hour enjoying them. For most people, for most of history, gathering and preparing food has been an occupation at the very heart of daily life. Traditionally, people have allocated a far greater proportion of their income to food, as they still do in several of our countries where people eat better than we do and as a consequence are healthier than we are. Here then is one way in which we do well to go a little native, backwards, or perhaps it is forward, to a time where a place where the gathering and preparing and enjoying of food were closer to the center of a well-lived life. I'd like to propose 3 rules. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants, that I now need to unpack, providing some elaboration and refinement in the form of more specific guidelines, injunctions, subclauses, and the like. Each of these 3 main rules can serve as category headings for a set of personal policies to guide us in our eating choices without too much trouble or thought. The idea behind having a simple policy like avoid foods that make health claims is to make the process simpler and more pleasurable than trying to eat by the number of nutrients, as Nutrism encourages us to do. So under Eat Food, I propose some practical ways to separate and defend real food from the cascade of food-like products that now surround and confound us, especially in the supermarket. Many of the tips under the rubric concern shopping and take the form of filters that should help keep out the sort of products you want to avoid. Under Mostly Plants, I'll dwell more specifically and affirmatively on the best types of foods, not nutrients, to eat. Lest you worry, there is, as the adverb suggests, more than this list than fruits and vegetables. Last, under Not Too Much, the focus shifts from the food themselves to the question of how to eat them, the manners, mores, and habits to go into creating a healthy, pleasing culture of eating.